Hello and welcome to Syd Barrett's second and final solo album, just called Barrett, released in 1970 as well. Both of his solo albums released in 1970. It's actually pretty decent in my opinion. This is the track listing, and these are the tracks I added to my playlist, 5 out of 11, so almost half here. This album's surprisingly decent. There's a couple of good songs across the album. The opening track is actually pretty well done, and the higher quality tracks are spread across the album such that it doesn't get too boring until the very end. Plus, the style here is a little bit more upbeat and less acoustic than his other solo albums, so it's aged a bit better here. It kind of sounds a little bit more listenable. Sounds less like Pink Floyd's 1967 debut album, The Piper at the Gates of Dawn, and more like their 1969 album More, or even some of the tracks off of 1970's Adam Heartmother or 1971's Metal. Definitely a more experienced album here. In general, the album sounds a lot more polished than Syd's first album, which is good, although it's still probably not quite as polished as it could have been. I think even Adam Heartmother is more polished than this one. There's a lot of noodling here. Plus, the quality is just not super consistent across the album. Only every other song is really listenable. The other ones are kind of eh. And even the listenable ones are not incredible. Still, about the half the album is decent enough. It's not bad at all. It flows fine since every other song is surprisingly decent. You never get bored, but you also never really get into the album very much. Never really goes anywhere. There were no singles released before the album, and no tracks here were particularly popular at the time. My favorite track here is definitely the opener, Baby Lemonade. It's the only one here that really has any shot of being a hit. Definitely the correct track to start the album, a clear step above pretty much all the other tracks in terms of quality and polish on it. I do rank this album better than Syd Barrett's other solo album, The Madcap Laughs. I think this one, Barrett, has better overall quality, and I definitely like the style of this one better than his first album, although I will admit that the eccentricity of Syd is kind of lost in the more polish that this album has compared to The Madcap Laughs. It's definitely a little bit less out there, although it's still pretty wacky. Barrett really does kind of just sound like a low-tier Pink Floyd album, where The Madcap Laughs is definitely sort of Syd Barrett on his own. Unsurprisingly, this album does not take my top spot from 1970. That stays with the Beatles' final album, Let It Be, which is definitely a lot better than Barrett. Pretty much every song on Let It Be is better than every song here, so really no competition. That one's definitely preferred. Thank you for watching. Next up is the Beatles' 1967 movie soundtrack album, Magical Mystery Tour. The movie, I've seen it. It isn't terribly great, but the album is still really high quality, especially for the Beatles, so it's still a pretty good listen. So stay tuned for that, and as always, stay minty.